Welcome, everybody. What a great way to start our program tonight. As you all know, we will be talking about Shoplifters tonight with three wonderful, wonderful Japan specialists in the Boston area. Alexander Zahlten from Harvard University, Ian Condry from MIT, and Susan Napier from Tufts University. I am going to make my introduction very short today because what a great opportunity to have these three wonderful Japan specialists to talk about this particular film. So with that said, I would like to share that we're going to be doing something a little bit different today in that I have asked our speakers, and they are really excited to actually receive questions in person. So you don't need to send them via chat. You will have a chance to ask them in person, probably starting from about 5:30. So with that said, Alex-san, take it from here, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity to have this discussion. We were just saying before, so welcome to everyone attending. So happy to see so many people here. I was just talking to Yuko about the fact that actually, even between Ian, Susan, and myself, we don't actually have a lot of opportunity to sit down and for an extended period of time talk about a single film or so. That almost never happens. So it's a great opportunity for us as well. And I think we're all going to really enjoy this. So Shoplifters, I think a film almost everyone will have heard of at least, and maybe many will have seen as well. Really successful film, won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, was shown at many film festivals internationally, was even released in the US, which is still fairly unusual for films from Japan, especially for live action films. You know, as we saw in the opening clip, a really masterfully directed film. It's just very engaging. It goes right into action, right? We open up with drama, right? What's going to happen, and we have an immediate tension, and what's going on, and what are these characters? Are they going to get caught or whatnot? Kore-eda as a director really knows how to grab us at the very first opportunity and kind of keep us attached and interested in the story. But you know, why is a film like that so successful in you know, internationally, when so many other films from Japan that arguably are excellent as well are not? What makes this film kind of special, or what makes this film kind of specific in some ways? What do we know about how the film is received in Japan? What do we think about the film, and so on? So those are things we're going to talk about for the first half hour here, and then go straight to your questions and maybe even comments as well. It'd be great to hear what people think of the film. So maybe I'll just start by throwing something at Susan and Ian. Just you know, the question: why do you think that this film was so successful? Why is it this film that everyone has heard of outside of Japan, right?
You first, Susan.
Okay. Well, actually, I was thinking, you know, first of all, I'm really happy that we're seeing this film. I've seen it before and really liked it, but the second time I really, really liked it. And in fact, I was reading a review and someone said the exact same thing. It's a film that bears repeat viewings. But one thing I also read when I was, you know, looking at reviews was someone said, why hasn't Kore-eda ever gotten an Academy Award? Why isn't he even more famous and appreciated than he is? And what this person came up with, the idea that, and I thought this was interesting, and I may get in deep trouble. I've already been warned by Ian about this, but people are saying that Kore-eda is not Japanese enough. And that there is a sense on people's part that they still want to see I don't know, samurai films or, people with tattoos or things like that. And I don't know, I'm a little bit surprised because my students, I think, have gone beyond that particular stereotype of Japan. But I was thinking that maybe in a way, because he has, I think, I'll talk later about there's a very Japanese aspect to him, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for that too. But also he is, I mean, just that opening scene is very global. It's a older man and a younger man in a supermarket, and shoplifting. That's something we could all identify with. And then it's only gradually that the film becomes more intricate and intimate. But I think it's dealing with things such as poverty and also the kind of the loss and disintegration of family that are things that are very, very universal.
Nice, Susan. Very interesting. You're welcome to talk about Japaneseness. Don't get me wrong. I'm very curious to hear, and I do believe it could be a criticism of this film. Like this film could be anywhere. It could be any society, and why is it set in Japan? I think that's actually an interesting observation. And answering your question, Alex, I have no idea. I don't know why some things get through, some things don't. It's pretty circuitous. It's not random, but the gatekeepers are often complex, I think. I first found out about Kore-eda with his movie Wonderful Life, Wonderful Life, or it was called Afterlife in English. One of his early ones, not his first one, but one of his earlier ones, I guess. And it had a slightly similar aspect to me in the sense of you're watching it going, I thought this movie was about one thing, but now I think it's actually about something else. And the kind of the evolution of what the story is. I mean, it's not like it's not a rags to riches story, for example. It doesn't have that kind of arc. It's unusual. And one of the things that is, so I'm a cultural anthropologist, and so not a film scholar particularly, but I was very interested in the kinship and the family connections here, and the kind of unraveling the mystery of who's related to who and what's going on here, and how when our expectations of a family are sort of thrown into disarray, how it can be unsettling, right? It can be it's engrossing to try to figure out, and yet throughout it's like this is a family that loves each other, right? That gets along, that is a family, I just happened to come across this song. I'll give my plug. I have a radio show on Tuesday nights. And so in preparation for last week's Pride Week radio show, I played some Rina Sawayama, and she has a new song called Chosen Family, and this idea that people wouldn't accept us as family. Some people would not accept us as family. It's counting as family. But I've chosen you, and we are a chosen family, and it's a beautiful thing. And it was remade as a duet with Elton John, and I thought it resonated very much with this kind of questioning of our relationships and what really matters. And so for me, that was the thing that draws me to this film, and it makes it so fascinating to me. What about you, though, Alex?
I mean, I think traditionally, in a way, what has made film from Japan really travel well has been when it has this kind of humanist appeal and trying to address universal themes in a way. Kurosawa Akira's films were very, in some ways, were aggressively humanist, right? And that was really what captured foreign audiences. So then there's, of course, the kind of the sweet spot with them, with the films also having this feeling that you're seeing something that's in some ways also specific maybe to the context of Japan.
But what do you mean by humanist, Alex? What are you talking about?
Well, I think this is actually maybe one of the reasons that Kore-eda is really popular internationally and actually not that popular in Japan.
Really?
Right. So in magazines like Eiga Geijutsu, Film Art, which is one of the last remaining kind of serious critical film journals, his films are voted worst film of the year. In their worst, they have a worst 10 list, right? They're very opinionated, but right. And audiences in Japan, even though the films are successful when they win prizes abroad, which gives them a lot of publicity, they're often not really well discussed by audiences or critics in Japan. And that's kind of an interesting disjuncture, right? And I think that has something to do with the fact that humanist film hasn't played well in Japan for a long time, meaning films that kind of have the basic message, people are good. Society is bad or the system is bad, but people are good and we all struggle, we all try, and it puts the humans at the center of the people at the center of it, right? And they have a kind of tendency towards melodrama, right? This film goes all in at the end with the bus driving away, the father running, right? The child mouthing silently, otosan. And it's like, right, high melodrama. But, and that, you know, that's something I think that people can easily relate to, but sometimes audiences in Japan think is a bit too much or too didactic or whatever. They're different.
And so what's an example of a non-humanist film? Godzilla?
Depends on the Godzilla
Godzilla's
right?
very- Yeah.
But yeah, a lot
what's
of,
an example? What
there was a
would be
big
non-humanist
like
film?
all of, say, if you're looking at the classics, right, all of Nagisa Oshima's films, right, Oshima
Okay.
Nagisa, all explicitly anti-humanist. He wrote all these essays against humanism and whatnot. There's a whole generation of filmmakers.
But you mean, is it the idea that humans are just junk? They're bad. Is that that's anti-humanist then?
In a way, right? It's saying, you know, don't
I'm getting
just,
us off track. I was just curious.
well,
but-
no, it's like the idea of that generation was that humanism is just victim mentality, right? And they clearly tied that to a generation of filmmakers that started in wartime and so on, right? So they thought, you know, people are good, the system is bad. That's just, you know, get a grip and take responsibility was kind of their take, right? And in a way, right, that their take maybe on a Kore-eda film would be, you know, okay, this family can say, okay, people are so bad and the system is so bad and so on, but why don't you just, you know, invest in education, get a job, or change the system, overthrow the government, not just kind of retreat into the house and have this kind of wonderful intimate family relationship, right? That would maybe be Oshima's take on this.
I'm also thinking of
Interesting.
Beat Takeshi, whom I also like a lot as a filmmaker, but he is very, I think you would say, anti-humanist. He is so violent and it's glorying in violence and in a way that kind of abysmalness of humanity. And I think it's why I do find Kore-eda so incredibly refreshing. And, you know, I still think humanist values are rather good values. And it's not just filmmakers. Oe Kanzaburo, the Nobel Prize winner, is certainly someone who's believed in, I mean, there's an old-fashioned term, decency. And again, I guess it sounds very old-fashioned. And maybe there is an aspect of Kore-eda that is very old-fashioned in a certain way, his real emphasis on human relations and above all.
Yeah, I found one of the things I found curious when I first watched the film was, I think, so I mean, the film is really masterfully directed, I think. And I think one of the main characters that isn't an obvious main character is the house in which they're, you know, a lot of the action takes place and the family has this kind of cocoon that they're living in, and the way that the house is staged and provides them the kind of space for that kind of, I guess, Ian, you were calling it mysterious kinship of sorts.
And not mysterious to them, right? That just to us. I mean, it was the filmmaker who decided how to tell this story, that we don't get instant access to this family. The family knows what's up, pretty much knows what's up. And yeah, that's very interesting. But the house, you're right, the house is like the safe zone, like protect this safe zone, and how important is it to have they're not out in the street actually, and they're proud of themselves holding it together and not being out in the street and keeping keeping the gentrification even at bay. Barely, it seems like, but for the
I
moment.
love the house. And that's where, I started out by saying that it initially seems very global with this supermarket that can be anywhere in any major city. But the house did seem to me very Japanese, partly because it is an old-fashioned Japanese house, and they are sitting on the floor. They're sitting on tatami, and there has a sense of interaction with the outside that really, I do think, is very much sort of reminiscent of traditional Japanese houses and families. And I was mentioning this earlier, that there's this great scene, this very erotic scene when the Nobuyo and Osamu are talking, and then the rain start to fall. And you're in a house where you can really feel the rain. You can see it sort of coming in probably through the eaves or the windows. I mean, it's that kind of openness and this interaction with nature, and then that causes them to feel a sort of sense of intimacy, that sort of skinship, literally, that comes on. And I was saying that this may seem like an insane comparison, but it did remind me a little bit of an 18th century Japanese writer named, 17th century Japanese writer named Saikaku, who also writes about the working classes and, they're hucksters and grifters, and they're people just trying to get by. And there's also a strong element of eroticism. But this sense of the rain coming in, that to me was just the tactility and intimacy of it, made me sort of think of Japanese culture.
It's a great point. I kind of felt that was, to come back to what astonished me about the film when I first saw it, it has this curious aspect of exactly, Susan, what you were just saying, very carefully placing the global supermarket against this kind of intimate inner space of sorts. But at the same time, so the house seems, it's almost like a social realist kind of, right, kitchen sink realism type of setup in some ways, but it's also highly artificial too. It's very designed in its messiness, and it's a kind of it's also a bubble in a way. You feel like this is a film commenting on social problems in Japan to some degree, right? But at the same time, it's all about this fantasy of pure human connection within this family, right? And cell phones or the internet or social media, nothing like that plays a role in the film. There's one place where the TV appears, right? And that's because it's a kind of plot point. It's important for them to learn on TV that the girl is being searched for by the police. And apart from that, media don't exist. So a lot of what actually makes up social life and sociality in Japan today is totally missing, right? It excludes that from this kind of bubble space that he creates, and that's kind of curious and interesting.
It's almost anti-contemporary Japanese life. I mean, first of all, they're all together, they're eating together, they're sleeping together, they're bathing together, very much your kind of traditional, kind of stereotypical EA system, although with the father having a more complex role in all this. We could talk later on about think about the male-female relations in this. But yeah, it does seem like he's consciously creating this as an antidote to the cool minimalist urban space where everyone sits in their rooms and watches a screen.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, I hadn't really. The truth is, I hadn't really noticed that. Right, but the smartphones don't figure for once, whereas in people's lives now, I mean, it's hard to imagine a movie right now not dealing with people's smartphones somehow around the world, and so yeah, that it is. And obviously it's a conscious decision. Very careful, a careful approach there. Just fascinating. And so, Alex, so you have this idea of industrial genres. Does this relate at all to like how does, no, it's not, this is a totally different thing. You're in this
totally different thing, but
shtick.
Yeah, but it is interesting to think about what, where Kore-eda as a filmmaker comes from and what kind of section of the film industry he comes from, because he's originally from documentary film, right? And he started in a very famous company called Terebiman Union, which was the first independent documentary production company working for TV.
Wow.
And it was founded by several people who had defected basically from big TV stations for political reasons. So there was a lot of kind of internal, this was in the late 60s, early 70s, a lot of political debate, and they were kind of on the leftist side, activist side of things, and felt like the TV stations were too restrictive in their production policies, and wanted to produce a different type of TV documentary. And
in what direction? More, yeah, in what direction?
So one of the big things in the 60s that were discussed within the TV stations, the broadcasters, was how to create documentaries that have balance, that show both sides of the story.
Right.
And there were the younger filmmakers were all saying, you know, that's nice and well, but, you know, actually with state power, there is no balance, right? And we have to take sides. We have to show where we stand.
Right.
And so Teddy Beamon Union was one of the pioneers of that kind of approach, but they also introduced an approach that was unusual at the time, which was kind of docudrama, where they would stage scenes and have kind of you know, improvised stuff, and a different type of, not a type of documentary that claims to be fully objective, right, in the way that it's made or presents itself. And so Kore-eda comes out of that lineage in a way, because, you know, these are really well designed films in a kind of, in this filmmaking sense. You could see in the opening sequence how he's constantly using background, foreground, right? The boy, the background, you see the reflection of a shopkeeper, right? Or so, which helps build the tension, and these kinds of many layers that he builds into the image. So it's not what you would describe as documentary style. It's actually really stylized. You know, but I think that kind of idea that needs to be used to take a position and have a stance and so on, that's part of that lineage maybe that he comes out of.
So what do you think is the ideological slant on Shoplifters? I mean, obviously it's very non-judgmental of these people, but at the same time, even at the end when the state finally does intervene, they're not shown as, I'd say, completely evil. I mean, they, you know, they're you know, to go back to this mystery, they're kind of just trying to figure out what's going on. At least that's my impression. They didn't seem to.
I don't know. I got a very bad feeling from the police the second time, especially. It was funny, like I didn't remember that part of the film. Like thinking back on the film, I didn't remember that part so clearly. But watching it again, it felt pretty horrific what the police were doing to set them apart and set them on each other, and try to get under them, and falsely accuse the grandmother, for example, you know, of letting on Aki's location. Is when I'm still a little confused actually on some of the details. So whether one I could be corrected, it's possible. But I thought that like, because I was thinking what you were saying, Alex, about how, you know, the critics in Japan responded badly, but the people I've been hanging out with as kind of underground musicians, and, you know, the late night club people, and, you know, the artist, designer people who are kind of a little bit on the edges of a very monetized and slick media world, and they're sort of selected to be on the edges and participate, but then keep their distance. And among these folks, the film did great. You know, they were the ones who were like, oh, you got to see this film. This is a hell of a film, and this is how Japanese people care for the outcast in their society. You get a little picture right here. And so for them, it you know, even with the smarminess, one could say, you know, at certain points, the sentimentality, the melodrama, that the larger story of people being left to fend for themselves, and then when the police come in, not helping out, you know, not trying to get to the bottom of this and help the poor kid who broke his leg, trying to save his sister from getting in trouble. I mean, you know, that was not the intent at the end of the day, and I think that rung true to some of the folks who had a better appreciation of the movie.
Well, potentially to back up your point, Ian, that the one point in the movie where I felt that the state was perhaps behaving absolutely heinously, and I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, was when they were suggesting to Shota, the boy, right, that his family were going to leave him. But the only question is, were they correct or not? I couldn't tell, because it did seem like it would. Then Shota says to his father, or what, Osamu, so were you guys going to leave me? And I think Osamu says, well, yeah. So I'm not sure who comes out really badly there.
Yeah, they were going to come back for him for sure, though. They sneak back in. They get the grandma to go get them. Not the grandma's dead. They get the
Right,
they get
that's
somebody.
dead, but otherwise,
Grandma's dead at that point. Grandma's dead at that point. But anyway, you might be right. But I don't know. That's interesting. That's interesting. That's a way to read it.
But yeah, I mean, it's a good question. What does the film say in the end, right? When it doesn't seem as if, Shota is being set up for this terrible fate. I mean, Yuri kind of is,
right?
The little girl.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not across the board kind of, okay, they've been destroyed, and right. It's obviously also it's a family, and like every family, they have issues that obviously too. But yeah, why does he set up this kind of almost idealized kind of intimate community to tear it down, right? Is that the statement that he's making, that this is disappearing, that this is under assault, that the modern world the contemporary world is cold and heartless? It doesn't seem to be completely that, right? It seems to be a bit more complicated. But I don't know, what's your...
He does. He literally used nature to show coldness. I mean, that very affecting early scene when they find Yuri. I mean, again, this is something that, it's this feeling of just, she is icy out there, and then taking her into this warm, obviously warm, embracing household. And yeah, it is this feeling. And of course, we then have conflate that iciness with her parents, who do sound absolutely horrible. And yeah, I mean, he does seem to have a lot of, I don't know if it go back to Ian's point about sentimentality. We do have some very strong kind of and opposites going on in this film, which, help to make the point, as you say, about the loss of the sadness of the loss of this kind of intimate family relationship.
Yeah, I see we're basically at halftime now. Maybe we could open up to questions, and I think people could simply raise their virtual hand.
Raise a virtual hand, or you could put something in the chat, and then maybe there's several questions, and we can sort of start going through the chat. And that's another way to do it.
Yeah, either is completely fine if you want to. Any mode of communication that you.
And I felt the one word that kept ringing in my mind was, and to some extent, mujun. Like, there's no right or wrong. There's no answer, but it's an answer. The question's an answer, and the answer's a question. And it's one of those. Now, as I as somebody who also associates oneself as an American woman, now that I'm in the United States, sometimes that's the part of Japan that I don't like. It's like, just tell me if it's right or wrong. Tell me if it's red or white. And I just felt, I actually love that about that movie, because, it's like, is this family right? Is Yuri going to be happier going back to her own family? Yes, no, maybe. Then what is this fake family? Yes, no, maybe. This fuzziness that I feel, I could get in trouble, that I feel is very Japanese. What do you think about that?
I've been thinking a lot about this concept of ambiguous loss, because I work on Miyazaki, and his films contain a lot of loss that's not definite, like a mother is sick, but she's not dead. And I think, again, it's not just only Japanese. I think this coronavirus has brought a lot of ambiguous loss, because ambiguous loss is when you feel the loss of something, but you can't quite mourn it because it's not totally gone yet. And I think that's where the film really beautifully expresses this, by creating a counterfeit family to show us that, are we mourning the loss of a counterfeit family of shoplifters and grifters? And that's that ambiguity there, because we are, but because it's the best we can do. It's about the best that we can give people now. And so this feeling of, you say, fuzziness or ambiguity, I think is really an issue. And I don't think it's just Japan, but I think over the last 100 years, maybe, really from the time of maybe even the time of Restoration, when you're losing a culture, but you're not really losing it. And now, you have, you can't quite mourn it, you can't quite grieve it, but you want to, and you have this feeling of confusion and sadness and yearning, but you're not even quite sure what you're yearning for.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, right. It's true. I guess what I hear in your question, Yuko, and it's something I feel like I experience too, is that when we move between cultures, or we spend time sort of in two cultures, that they both are real, and they hold up a comparison to each other. I'm always a little skeptical. I do it all the time, but then when I sort of tease it apart, I say, well, actually, the brash Westerner and the quiet receding Japanese person could also be the brash New Yorker and the quiet receding Minnesotan Midwestern person, and so that we can make these things. So I think it is very interesting, and it gets at some of these questions of is it the universalist, the humanist, or is this desire for a specificity what makes something jump out? I think it's very interesting observation.
Yeah, I would agree, just to follow up on what Ian was saying. I think that's partially what you're saying is partially true. On the other hand, I think it's true, especially if we think in the background of that as a foil, Hollywood cinema, which is so clear cut, right? In terms of good, evil, what's the conflict, right? Is clear by minute 5 of the film, and so on. And that actually doesn't apply to most other film industries in the world. They don't have that kind of clear cutness, just like Japanese cinema in many cases does not, right? There are a few that do, but most don't. I mean, Korean cinema is a good example, where the larger part of Korean cinema is also partially because it's modeled on Hollywood cinema. Has that, but most other film industries don't, actually. And I think, yeah, Kore-eda is maybe, I think this film especially is interesting in the way, because it's not static ambiguity, it's actually asking questions. So as we were just saying, it's kind of, what's going on? Is this good or bad, or are these people culpable of something that we should they be in some way, left alone? Would that really be a good thing?
Yeah, it's
right.
Really-
So I think that's a really fine line that Kore-eda toes, and he's really expert at doing that. It's that kind of high melodrama, but also kind of this ambiguous space, and asking questions, using it to ask questions instead of just kind of letting it float.
Jane Willis has her hand up.
Oh, wonderful. Jane Willis.
Oh, hi, everyone. Thanks for doing this. I was curious what your thoughts were about what the movie says about fatherhood. I think, in my view, like, sort of the grandmother was ideal. She didn't seem to have any flaws that I can recall. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but the Frankie as a father, he wanted to be a father. He wanted to be a good father, but then I felt like Shota did not want the younger sister to become a shoplifter. I got that sense at the end, and so maybe he'd be a better father. And so I didn't know what, and it's informed by sort of an American view of sort of imperfect fatherhood, which is common, of course. But I was just curious what, from a Japanese perspective, what insights you guys have about what, if anything, he was saying about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I could dive in. I mean, I shouldn't dive in because I don't know what it's saying about fatherhood. I think you're right. It's sort of the pivot of the story, and it kind of ends, with that, the Shota not being able to say it to his face, but kind of then recognizing it, sort of accepting it, or acknowledging it, maybe is the way to put it. I don't, I think this movie, it's, for me, it's a little hard to say, and then generalize, say now Kore-eda is saying this about Japan and family. I think it is interestingly ambiguous, and this kind of, this battle for the value of a family and wherein lies the value of the family is always a kind of a little loose. I think that's actually endemic to all families. One of the things that I grew up with is my mother, who grew up with a single mother, always objected to the term broken families. She's like, we weren't a broken family, and the truth is, she had an abusive husband and got away from him, and so it was arguably better to be in a broken family, it was, and my mom was always like, this is broken family. It was me and my mom, we were a family. It was fine, it was very comfortable and happy. And so, that maybe that's another statement on fatherhood. But it's interesting. I think you've hit on a really key point of the movie. And to me, I don't have a single interpretation of it, but I guess that's all I wanted to highlight. What else?
That also reminded me of the Dagashiya-san, the snack store man.
Yes.
Talking about father figure, whether we call that a father figure, but how he stops Shota, who's trying to teach Yuri to shoplift. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how, he's always known Shota, right? It wasn't like he didn't know that he was shoplifting. Right. And I think that is kind of another interesting sort of, let me throw out a question out there of, how does he compare with the role Frankie Lilly was playing, and what does it mean? Like the Dagashiya snack man was meo tsubutteta, as we say in Japan, right? Like knew what's happening, but pretended that he didn't know, but he had to stop when he was teaching Yuri. What does that mean? I think those are Jane-san, wonderful question that's spurring another question in my mind. Michael-san, you have a question.
Hello. It seems to me that something you have in Kore-eda is he's asking people, insofar as the Japanese audience, asking them to look at things that they'd rather not look at. And you have what I have is the 4 darkest films of Distance and Nobody Knows and Third Murder and this. He's really asking them to have some introspection. He's not criticizing any particular individual so much as he's saying, this system is really inhumane. There are things about this that are intolerable, and we ignore them. And I think you have that in his lighter films, you have some of that, but it's not on the systemic level quite to the extent that those 4 are. But it sort of goes way back, because when Ozu tried to do this sort of thing, the audience stayed away in droves. So when he did Hen in the Wind, it was a flop. When he did Early Spring, it was pretty much a flop. When he did Tokyo Twilight, was a catastrophe. So, and I'm not saying that this is unique to Japan. It's just Japan happens to have these rare figures who say, take a look at how we behave. Take a look about what we take for granted. Think about it, and maybe we should change it. In a certain sense, Takahata in Grave of the Fireflies, in a more flashy context. I don't know that we have very many directors like that in the United States. They're even rarer. But when people do it, no matter what country it is, people don't like it. And in a sense, the United States doesn't react well, particularly to Kore-eda, not because it's directly criticizing. I don't know that we see ourselves in Kore-eda's films. We can and should, because what he's showing about Japan society very often is just as much true about our own, but we're not going to see that. But I think they get the sense of uneasiness. They know there's something going on that's not easy to define, that doesn't fit with our norms. And it's like, this sort of creeps me out. It's not giving me, you've already talked about lack of definitive answers, and that's part of it, but I think it's only part of it. So it's like, third murder. It's like, what's going on? It's changing every 5 minutes. The ground has fallen out from under our feet. So, what I found interesting, you mentioned, Ian, about the police. I love Chizuru Ikawaki. She's one of my favorite actresses. And it just was breaking my heart to watch her be such a total louse. It's and the first time I had a negative reaction, but by this third rewatching that we just did, it's oh, I found that very hard to take. So
I have a much more concrete question. And I'll tell you, as an amateur film watcher, Japanese film watcher, what intrigued me most with this movie was the kaleidoscope effect. You see the beginning and you think you know how these characters are related and what's going on. And with every scene, the kaleidoscope turns and you have to add something new and you have to figure out a new set of relationships. And I think it's very interesting that you keep talking about Juri as the sister of Shota, because she's not, but she is his sister. And ultimately he even recognizes that. But my specific question is two, actually. At the end, Shota says to his father, I got caught on purpose. But he never says, I got caught on purpose to save my sister, or I got caught on purpose because I'm seeing the wrongness in this operation and I wanted a way out. And he didn't get caught on purpose because he was forced to jump over the railing. He was caught by accident because two employees came from two opposite ends of the bridge. So there's another bit of ambiguity, but I wonder if there's anything in the Japanese, which I don't understand, that leads to a more specific, I got caught on purpose because. That's one question. The other question is, what does the little girl see at the end before the screen goes black? Because her face changes and she sees something. What do you think she sees?
Just say great questions. I have no idea. You go ahead, Susan.
I just wanted to mention how much I love the your point about the kaleidoscope. I think that's brilliant, really good. We were talking before it started a little bit about tonal shifts. And, because I read a brief article or actually saw a video about this and comparing two films, one of them Kore-eda's Shoplifters, and how you have one explanation at the beginning and then about halfway through you shift, you suddenly realize you're on sinking sand. But actually, as you say, it's much more complex than that. There's a constant shifting and changing right in front of your audience's expectations. So you're constantly a little bit disordered, disoriented, destabilized but in a way that's kind of exciting and interesting.
Yeah, really important questions and interesting points. I think actually there are a lot of, this is speaking to Michael's comments, but I think there are a lot of directors in Japan that actually make films about things that generally maybe audiences don't want to think about too much, but they don't all win prizes at international film festivals, and they don't travel as well as Kore-eda's films do. So that's more the question for me is why Kore-eda's films specifically, what makes them so mobile and so appealing to audiences internationally, and maybe rubs audiences in Japan and critics in Japan the wrong way in a very specific way that these other films maybe don't, which are either more successful or completely ignored, but not reviled by the critics in the way that at least in some ways Kore-eda's films sometimes are. But yeah, and I would also, this is me being devil's advocate, I'm not sure if the themes that Kore-eda touches upon are necessarily themes that in Japan are swept under the rug all the time. I think they're actually things like poverty and, you know, the rise of shoplifting, especially for seniors and so on, are things that are discussed almost daily on the morning wide show and places like that. I'm not sure if they're hidden in the way that, you know, that Kore-eda is uncovering these things that are otherwise completely, you know, purposefully repressed or so, but he's framing them in a way that obviously affects people either positively or negatively in ways that other films that maybe address similar topics don't. And that's really interesting. I don't have a great answer to why that is, but yeah.
I thought
Right.
Kore-eda often bases his movie on actual things that came up on the news. I think Shoplifter was something, definitely shoplifting, especially for elders, have been rising. The changing family have been discussed. I think that's what you mentioned when you mentioned he comes out of documentary. I know that his earlier movies were like literally based on a few actual big news. That's, you know, it actually something similar to that happened.
Yeah, nobody knows if people have seen that film, which was about a group of children who were left alone by their mother in the apartment for weeks. And that was based on an actual story. And was another film that was kind of very ambivalently received in Japan. Though the case itself was one that made of course, got a lot of attention. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean,
And just not, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alex, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to, if we're talking about, I don't know if we have to frame everything in terms of national cinemas or so, because there's so much variation within each of the contexts. But I think you're right that not all film industries have a strong kind of bent towards, you know, that kind of self-reflexivity, but maybe the case of Korea the Korean film industry is really interesting, because basically all of Korean cinema is about how corrupt, violent, and patriarchal Korea is. But it packages it into these glamorous blockbuster formats. And that's kind of unusual in kind of the world context. In that sense, what Michael's saying is, I think.
Well, there is an exception in Korea, at least one, of Lee Chang-dong.
Yeah, but he's an exception, right? So he's really within the context of Korean cinema.
To the Japanese in some way, and really not sugarcoating or. And I think what Kore-eda is doing might be different is he's not assigning explicit blame, but he is implicating his audience. He's saying, don't blame just the officials. These people have neighbors. These people, they're in a society, they have coworkers, they have bosses, and these people are being treated like complete rubbish. You know, the person can't get workers' comp when he gets a serious injury, probably because his employer has been doing something shady. The woman is working and has no benefits, has no job security. So, I mean, people focus, oh, these are shoplifters. No, these are people who are actually trying to work and play by the rules, and they're not able to do it. The shoplifting is for extras that they can't afford otherwise, that other people take for granted. So, I mean, I think what kind of irritates people, especially perhaps the Japanese audience, is just like when Ozu at the end of Tenement Gentlemen, it's like, you need to take care of these orphans. We have these war orphans. It's all our problem. We should be doing something. And the audience like, go screw yourself, Ozu. We don't want to see this. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to think about it. So that's what perhaps, yes, you talk about shoplifting, you talk about child abuse, you talk about the lonely deaths, but Kore-eda is saying, don't act like it's somebody else's fault. What are you going to do about it? And people don't want to be asked that question. No, nobody wants to be asked that question.
And just to respond to, I'm sorry, Alex, I cut you off, but I just have a quick thing to say to respond to the other two questions. Here's would be my interpretation, just to not leave you hanging, although it's just one person's interpretation, is that the boy got caught, Shota got caught on purpose to save the sister. He wasn't making the big decision to end everything right there. That would be my interpretation. And the girl, even if she doesn't see some member of the family walking down the street, it's obvious that that's what she's looking for. And it was expressing the anticipation of it. And then I guess the only thing that might be hidden in the language that's the difference between the two is that in English it's called shoplifters, but in Japanese it's called shoplifter family. And it's family. It's not shoplifter fake family or shoplifter con artists or shoplifter con game. It's shoplifter family. And how that's, whoa, what, how could that be? And so anyway, there, that's all I
and we get
that. I mean, Kore-eda is kind of manipulating his Japanese audience by saying shoplifters family, and sort of like, oh, of course you're going to assume it's a family. I mean, the director said
the EA.
so.
It's the EA system for the shoplifters, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's exactly how we saw at the beginning in the clip, how it's introduced, right? They enter into the supermarket, and then they start walking in, and the camera follows the two together, right? They move as a unit, right? And we get that from the very first, the second shot of the film.
Yeah, their signal,
really well done.
And at the end, the son kind of punches the father, on his shoulder. It's very clear that they're a team.
Yeah. And just a quick, I see there are more questions. So just a very brief side comment on what Michael was mentioning, Lee Chang-dong, the Korean director, whose film Burning was actually in competition at Cannes when Shoplifters won the Palme d'Or. Yeah, people can watch it for themselves. I mean, I appreciate Shoplifters a lot. I think it's really masterful filmmaking. I think Kore-eda knows exactly what he's doing, and he really shows the high art of filmmaking in doing that. But I'll out myself here. I think Burning should have won the Palme d'Or and not Shoplifters.
Oh,
But take a look and decide for yourself. Okay, maybe questions.
Fantastic. Yes, so Regina has a question for us.
Hello, Regina calling from Munich in Germany. I was from overseas, yeah. I was wondering that among Kore-eda's films, like Shoplifters was quite famous and popular internationally, and why this is. Do you think it's rather because at the time it came out, he was already a distinguished director, or is it because there's something in the film that really stands out in comparison to his other films?
Well, I'm happy to start to attempt, and then Ian and Susan can jump in.
I think that's you, Alex. I think you should just take it. You should take it. We gotta get to other people too. You should take that one, Alex.
I think it's both. I think there's something about the film that makes it easy for it to appeal to audiences internationally. But also, of course, there's the kind of film festival circuit and the kind of rules that govern it. And Kore-eda has been a kind of star on the international film festival circuit since 1995, since his first film Maboroshi, which was, endlessly likened to Ozu, and in its style, something that Kore-eda himself rejects in every interview that he gives, but that people bring up again and again. And that's always a good way to market a filmmaker from Japan, is to refer to Ozu or to Kurosawa or so. But film festivals also have a kind of policy of sorts. They want to support certain filmmakers. And once they're on the track within a certain film festival, those film festivals try to program their films and keep them kind of in the loop. So, Kore-eda's next film is obviously going to always get a lot of attention and have a higher probability of getting into the competition of a major film festival than a film by a completely unknown filmmaker, even if, you know, depending on whatever standards you apply, they might be equally interesting or so. That probably Kore-eda would win out in most cases, right? There's a kind of competition around certain filmmakers' names and brands or so as well. So I would say it's both.
Fantastic, thank you. Magdalena has a question for us.
Hi, sorry for being so late, but English is not my first language, so I've been building up my confidence for a long time before asking. More so saying than asking, because it's not really a question, more like a comment. But we've talked a lot about the younger kids. But what I found really interesting in the movie was Aki's relationship with the grandma, which we really see portrayed in a very interesting way. I mean, they are not related by blood, but they have some connections within the family that's outside of the Shoplifters family. And I don't know, I just wanted to point it out because it was like a little omitted. It was a little on the side, and I think it's a very good point of the movie, because we really see Aki mourning after the grandma's death. And we really see the connection between them, like when they're eating in the restaurant together, or when they're talking about the dress that shows the side of the boob, or I don't remember what that exactly was, but I just thought it was a very good representation of a very old relationship between two women bonded somehow. So yeah, I hope I was understandable. Sorry.
I'm glad you made that point, because I also think it's an older generation and a much younger generation. She is, you know, definitely another, you know, she's much younger than Nobuyo and Osamu, but she's a little bit older than the other two. So she's in a slightly indeterminate position. And then we have a much older woman, the grandmother, and they're bonding in a way that's very feminine. Which I mean, I love. There's a scene where the grandmother's kind of stroking her hair or something. She's lying there, and it's interesting because you can compare that to when she's with her client Aki, and he's sort of this, you know, this guy who's, you know, lying there in her lap, you know, and she's kind of taking care of him. But she gets to go home and have this woman, this older woman, take care of her, and it's a very affecting relationship, exactly as you said.
So unfortunately, we're at 6. Time flies when we're having a fantastic conversation, and that was definitely one fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Susan, Ian, and Alex. There's a couple things I know I would love for Susan and Ian to share with us. I know, Susan, you have some really exciting thing coming up this weekend that I would love for you to share with the audience. And Ian, I know you have a great suggestion of how we should be spending our time from 7 p.m. Eastern time. So with that said, Susan, can you share with us how we should be spending our weekend?
Thank you. It's about Miyazaki, surprise, surprise. And I should mention that Miyazaki's Howl's Moving Castle, which I think is in 2008, ends up with another form of very unusual family. You have an old lady witch who's been kind of brought in off the streets, and then you have an old woman who's actually transformed young female, and you have a young kid, and you have a wheezy dog, and you have this handsome wastrel Howl, and they're all together as a family in a way that's really did make me think of this movie too. But speaking of Miyazaki, there are big things going on with him. The Academy of Motion Pictures is starting a new museum in September. They're inaugurating a new museum. The Academy's been around for almost 100 years. They're the ones who give out the Oscars, and they're inaugurating their new museum with an 9-month exhibition on Miyazaki, honoring Miyazaki. And I'm tremendously excited about that. It is in Los Angeles, but if you're, happen to be going, or if you're a rabid Miyazaki fan, you should go. But just in case you're interested before then, on July 3rd, this Saturday, Anime Expo is happening virtually in Los Angeles. And I am having a panel discussion with 2 of the curators from this Miyazaki exhibition and a journalist from the Los Angeles Times. And it's an amazing exhibition from what I've seen about it. I think if you're interested in Miyazaki, it's really worth trying to find out more about this. So Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. I hope
Thank you, Susan. And Ian-san, what should we be doing at 7?
I just put it in the chat, but I have a radio show in Cambridge on WMBR 88.1 FM. It's Tuesdays, 7 to 8 p.m., a weekly show. And there's also an archive on Mixcloud, so you can listen to it when you want. It's Japanese hip hop, but it's other stuff too. So yeah, if that's interesting to you, please check it out. That'd be great. And if you can't find it, just email me. You can find me at MIT.
And 7 o'clock on Tuesdays, correct?
7 o'clock on Tuesdays, 1 hour every week.
An hour from now. Yeah.
And anytime on archive.
Anytime on the archive. Yeah, you can pause, skip ahead, find even more interesting stuff. You can do it all.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Yuko. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank
you.
you. And thanks to all the people who came. Thank you. What a
Yes,
great crowd.
thank you
oh my
for
God.
coming.
And
Thank
wish we
you
could have more
so much.
discussion. And I can't wait till we can do all this in person and do even more rapid fire, getting things going.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And I'm sure I represent everybody by saying thank you, Alex, Ian, and Susan. This was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving us the opportunity. It was a load of fun.
Yeah, it was.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and hope to see you very soon in our future event, online or in person. Thank you.